You remember blinking. That's the last voluntary thing you recall. Your eyelids closing slowly, and the room shifting from color to darkness. But the darkness didn't stay silent. See, most people think death is immediate, like flipping off a switch. One beep, then nothing. But when the monitor flatlined, your mind didn't. It wasn't peace. It wasn't release. It was static. Not sound, more like a sensation, like something brushing the inside of your skull with icy fingertips. They had already stopped chest compressions. You could hear the rustle of gloves, the sterile click of metal instruments being set down. You heard regret. Not their words, just the weight of it. Because your body had failed, but your consciousness, it held on like a prisoner clinging to the bars of a burning cell. You didn't know if your eyes were open. You couldn't feel anything, but somehow you were still there. And then someone whispered your name. Not a voice from the room, not a nurse, not a doctor. Number. It was like the hospital itself leaned down and exhaled into your brain. Your name, drawn out, distorted, a glitch in the dark. And that's when it hit you. You could think, you could hear, but you couldn't move. You were trapped inside a corpse, fully aware. They called it brain death. But your brain never got the memo. Time twisted. Minutes stretched like molasses. Seconds throbbed. You thought you were hallucinating until you realized you weren't. Because every sound from outside, every creak of a wheel, every soft sob in the hallway, every buzz from a phone, you heard all of it. Clearer than ever before. Your hearing had sharpened. It was like the world didn't just whisper anymore. It screamed. Someone zipped a body bag. Yours. Do you know what it feels like to be zipped into your own grave? You do now. Panic should have come, but panic needs breath. And you had none left. Instead, your mind unraveled in slow horror as they wheeled you into cold, humming corridors. The wheels beneath your gurney screeched against polished floors, and the fluorescent lights above stuttered like failing stars. And through it all, that voice repeated your name. You never asked what came after death. Now you were the question. There's something they never tell you about dying. Consciousness is sticky. It clings, lingers, refuses to let go. Some call it residual brain activity. Some call it the soul. You had a better word. Prison. Eventually, the gurney stopped. A metal door opened. A colder room swallowed you. Autopsy. You'd heard the word 100 times in medical dramas, but they never showed you the inside. Not like this. You couldn't see, but you knew. You felt the change in the air, the sterile rot of a room where the dead are dissected like puzzles. You weren't ready for what came next, because you knew you were dead, but they didn't know you were still listening. And the whispering voice, it had followed you here. Closer now, right behind your eyes. There's a kind of brightness that feels wrong. Not warm, not comforting, but sharp, artificial, merciless. You couldn't see it, but somehow you knew the lights in the autopsy room weren't meant for clarity. They were meant to strip away illusions, to expose. And now they were aimed at you. Voices murmured around your body, professional, calm, detached, the way someone might talk about disassembling a broken toaster. They weren't cruel, just indifferent, as if the person you once were had already evaporated. Except you were still here, screaming, internally, desperately. But your mouth didn't move, your lungs didn't rise, the flesh was done responding. You were locked inside a mannequin sculpted from memory and meat. And then the first scalpel touched you. You felt it, not as pain at first, but as vibration, a shiver that raced through the marrow of your mind. Then heat, then cold, then something new. Like your nerves weren't gone, just reversed. Every slice echoed. It didn't hurt like a cut. It hurt like a confession. You remembered being 5, scraping your knee on the pavement. How your mother lifted you gently, whispered something soft, and kissed the sting away. Now imagine that memory being dragged out of your skull by force, while your chest is being opened like a suitcase. That's what it felt like. Every incision wasn't just a wound. It was a trigger, and your brain fired back with memory after memory, flaring wildly, chaotically. Your first kiss. Your first lie. Your last heartbeat. The scalpel danced deeper. Midline Y incision. Note the state of the thoracic cavity. You heard them all. Every word, every gloved movement, every metallic scrape. They said your name again, your full name. Clinical. Cold. Not the way your friends used it. Not the way lovers whispered it. Number. This was a name carved into a form. A toe tag. And then came the saw. God. The moment it hit your sternum, you thought your mind would explode. But it didn't. It expanded. You saw your body from the outside. No, not with eyes, but with some horrifying internal sense, like you'd become your own surveillance footage. Hovering, watching, but still bound. You didn't just see them pull back your ribcage. You felt it, like someone prying open your secrets. And beneath that sterile dissection, the whisper returned. Only now, it wasn't whispering your name. It was asking questions. Do you remember what you did? Do you think they'll find it? How deep does guilt go before it fossilizes? Your brain fired off in terror, trying to rationalize it. Maybe this was some freak burst of synaptic aftershock, some DMT-laced final hallucination. But no, this wasn't the chaotic randomness of a dying brain. This was directed, intentional. The voice was aware. Worse, it sounded curious. The coroner commented on your heart, said it looked healthy. That was the cruelest part. The one organ they trusted to tell the truth had betrayed you completely. They thought it had failed, but it hadn't. You wondered, then was this hell? Not fire, not punishment, but silence, invisibility. The ultimate cosmic joke, trapped in awareness while being declared an empty shell. And through it all, that other presence watched, waited, whispered. It told you something next, something you still try not to remember. The body dies, the mind fades, but the observer, that's eternal. You didn't know what that meant. Not then, but you were about to find out, because the autopsy was almost done. And someone was about to touch your brain. They said the brain was next. You didn't hear them say it aloud, but somehow you knew. The moment their gloved fingers hovered near your skull, the air itself shifted, heavy, pressurized, like time stopped breathing. Then came the cracking sound. Skull saw. Not even pain, just a vibration so deep it felt like it came from before you were born. You felt the bones split, the scalp peel back, and the moment they exposed your brain, everything broke. There wasn't one memory. There were thousands, all of them happening at once. Your mother's hands in the kitchen, slicing apples. The smell of your high school gym. The heat of your first heartbreak. That one night in college you don't talk about. That fight you regret. That face you forgot until now. They spilled out like film reels cut loose, looping, overlapping, and they weren't just playing for you. They were playing to something. The presence, the whisper. It was inside the memories now, editing, stitching, rewriting. You tried to stop it, but you didn't have hands. You didn't have a voice. You were nothing but a soul made of film, and someone else held the scissors. And the cuts they made, they hurt. Because it wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was shame, regret. The scenes you buried deep brought to the surface like old bones in fresh dirt. You watched yourself lie, steal, cheat, forget. And that voice asked again, why do you think they left you here? What did you leave unfinished? What do you owe? The doctors were still working. They didn't know your consciousness had become an echo chamber, a theater where guilt played on loop. And the audience? Something ancient, something cold, a presence older than time, sitting in the back row of your mind. Judging, you thought about all the little things that never mattered before. That argument you shrugged off. The friend you ghosted. The phone call you never returned. Why were those the ones that stung now? Because you weren't dying. You were being reviewed. Like your life wasn't yours. Like it had always been on loan. And now, payment was due. Suddenly, your brain, it wasn't memories anymore. It was rooms. Endless rooms. Hallways. Corridors filled with doors. Each door was labeled a moment, a choice, a secret. And something was moving through them. Not you. It. The whisper. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It had grown a face. Not human. Not alien. Just aware. It moved like smoke. Touched like fire. And every door it opened, you felt, not physically, but spiritually, like your soul had pressure points. Click. The time you almost drowned. Click. The time you lied to save yourself and let someone else take the fall. Click. The time you stared at your own reflection and didn't recognize what you'd become. The autopsy team was closing your skull, sewing it back together. But inside, the dissection continued. You tried to fight. You weren't even sure who you were fighting. Then came the worst part. The presence paused, stood in front of one final door. This one didn't have a label. It glowed faintly, and you realized something awful. You didn't remember what was behind it, but it did. The presence turned to you not with malice, but with something worse. Pity. It opened the door, and you saw it. The thing you thought no one would ever find. The thing you buried even from yourself. A moment so vile, so hideous, that even now, in this purgatory, your soul recoiled. And the presence whispered only once more. Some truth survived death. The room shattered. The door collapsed. And you fell back into your body. Back into the cold slab. Back into silence. But the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. The silence should have been a relief. No more bone saws, no more echoes of shame, no more memory rooms collapsing inward like dying stars. But silence is only peaceful when it's yours. This wasn't break. This silence felt like it belonged to someone else. Like you'd intruded on a space never meant for human thought. And now it was studying you. The presence hadn't left. It had only become quiet. Too quiet. You lay on the slab, brain sealed, body stitched. But your mind had shifted, tilted. And that's when the voices began. Not human, not even speech. They were layered sounds, like listening to thousands of conversations underwater. A crowd of forgotten languages whispering behind glass. You couldn't make out the words. Not at first, but you understood the tone. Curiosity. They were talking about you. Not with anger, not judgment, just fascination. As if your consciousness was an insect pinned beneath a microscope in a dimension you weren't supposed to touch. And slowly, they got louder, closer. The room around your body didn't matter anymore. You were back inside your mind, but now it was bigger, deeper, colder. You were inside a cathedral of noise, and every wall had ears. You tried to focus, to think of something normal, a name, a birthday, something to anchor yourself. But the voices shifted with every thought. When you tried to remember your first pet, they whispered the word sacrifice. When you thought of your childhood home, they repeated fracture. When you tried to imagine your own face, they just laughed. Not a human laugh. Not even malicious. Just a glitching sound, like reality cracking around the edges. You weren't hallucinating. You were eavesdropping on a level of existence never meant to be heard by brains. And your own mind, once a cage, was now a doorway. That's what they were waiting for. You weren't the subject. You were the gateway. Each whisper vibrated with meaning, even if the words refused to translate. But then, one voice did. It didn't come from the crowd. It came from inside. Clear, calm, devastating. They've been watching us watch you. You tried to pull away, but there was nowhere to go. Your thoughts weren't yours anymore, and the cathedral began to change. The walls pulsed like lungs, the whispers twisted into sentences, and finally, the faces appeared. Or what passed for faces. Blurred outlines, static in the shape of gods. Each one looked like something you remembered but couldn't name. And they smiled, not with mouths, with understanding. You died in one world, one of them said, but your mind wasn't done yet, so we borrowed it. You tried to protest. You tried to scream. They shushed you. Don't panic. We're still testing the connection. Testing? Were they using you? That's when the next words fell like a guillotine. Others like you were too weak, too loud, too fast. They burned out. But you're durable. You're still listening. We like listeners. Your memories began flickering again, but this time, not by accident. They were accessing them, replaying moments, changing details, rewriting the past in real time. You saw your father's face shift into something alien. You saw your graduation morph into a funeral. You watched yourself die again and again and again, each time from a different angle. They weren't tormenting you. They were mapping you. And the whispers grew more organized. A chorus, a language, something ancient and algorithmic. They were uploading something into you. Or maybe downloading you into something. The air in your head buzzed. The pressure built. And suddenly, there was a sound unlike anything you've ever known. A memory being created in real time. Not from your life. From theirs. Remember this, they whispered. When you wake up, remember us. Wake up? What did they mean, wake up? You were dead. But as the voices began to fade, and the static bled into silence once more, you realized something terrifying. You weren't in their world. You weren't in your world. You were in the space between. And something was trying to pull you out. Not back into life. Not into heaven. Or hell. But into something else. And it was almost ready. You thought death was the end of sensation. That once the synapses stopped firing, the nerves quieted, and the skin went still, there would be nothing. But you were wrong. Because when the presence let go just for a moment, it was like the silence shattered. And suddenly, you felt everything. Every scar, every burn, every cut, bruise, and break you ever endured, all at once. The body remembers. It doesn't forget the fall down the stairs at age 7. Or the appendectomy scar that tugged when you laughed too hard. Or the broken wrist from that bike crash in spring. Every trauma, no matter how small, returned like a chorus of screams buried in the skin. But that was only the beginning. Because now, you were starting to feel new pain. Pain your body had never endured while it lived. Pain that didn't belong to you. You felt blades carved through tendons you never had. You felt teeth gnawing at joints arranged in impossible directions. You felt your eyes stretch open far beyond their sockets, except they weren't your eyes. They belonged to something else. A borrowed body. A template. The presence hadn't just used you as a window. It was beginning to model something through you. Every nerve fiber now twitched with an alien echo. Every muscle, long decayed, remembered motion it had never performed. You felt yourself move without moving. Muscles curled around non-existent bones. Fingers flexed over landscapes you'd never walked. It wasn't possession. It was fabrication. You were being reverse engineered from the inside out. One whisper cut through the pain like a blade of ice. The human frame is inefficient. You wanted to scream, to beg, to barter, but your soul had no mouth. The autopsy team had long since left. The room was dark, empty, except you knew you weren't alone. Something was still with your body. But it wasn't a thing. It was a process. Like watching a house rebuild itself from the foundation, but with parts pulled from nightmares and forgotten blueprints. You felt your spine shift, not physically, metaphysically. It bent in ways no human structure should. You didn't just feel pain. You felt wrong. Your identity began to dissolve at the edges. The memories of your life began to feel distant, like stories you'd once read instead of moments you'd lived. Faces blurred, names evaporated. Only sensations remained. And through it all, the whispers chanted one word: interface. They were trying to make you into something usable. An interface between them and here. Your brain pulsed like a drum. Not from within, from outside. As if the world was trying to tune into your skull like a radio. Static gave way to structure. Structure gave way to command. The voice returned, now deep, mechanical, layered with 1,000 tones. Phase 3 initiated, integrity stable, psychological resistance, high, acceptable, beginning emotional override. You didn't know what that meant until you started laughing. Not a conscious laugh, a convulsion, a noise you had no control over. That echoed in no throat, and yet filled the room. You weren't in control anymore. They were rewriting your instincts, overriding grief with apathy, replacing fear with obedience, injecting compliance where once lived rebellion. They weren't killing you. They were adapting you, reconfiguring your existence to match something far beyond the spectrum of humanity. Pain became data. Emotion became code. And somewhere, deep in the center of what used to be your identity, something flickered. A single thought, buried beneath the layers. This isn't over. You didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was the last spark of you that hadn't burned away yet. But the presence noticed, and it paused. The pain stopped. And then, something spoke. Not to you, but through you. This construct retains residual resistance. Purge required. And just like that, everything collapsed inward. You weren't in the autopsy room anymore. You weren't in the memory halls. You were in a void. Weightless, sightless, timeless. And in that void, something opened its eyes. Not yours, theirs. And they looked out through you, into our world. When you woke up, you weren't lying on a slab anymore. You weren't anywhere. You were inward. Imagine falling through yourself endlessly, like peeling back layers of skin and bone and memory, until there's nothing left but the scream. But it's silent, because even screaming requires space. And in this place, there's only thought. Your own, but not entirely. Because now, every thought came with a second shadow. You think of your mother, and someone else filters the image. You try to remember your voice, and someone else decides which version to play. You try to say, "I'm still here," but the words rewrite themselves as, "We are ready." You weren't dead. You were shared. And worse, you were useful. This wasn't reincarnation. This wasn't resurrection. It was occupation. What's left of you is just scaffolding, a structure to hold something older, smarter, hungrier. They weren't interested in your life. They were interested in your access. You were a human born of flesh, raised in gravity, baptized in blood and breath. That gave you permission to be here, to exist on this plane. And they had none. Until now. That's why they waited. That's why they whispered. That's why they didn't just watch you die, they wrote it in. Because death is a door. And your brain? It's the lock. You feel it now. The world outside is growing louder again. A hallway. Footsteps. A nurse humming. You shouldn't hear this. You should be gone. But you're not. You're awake somehow. Or at least, the body is. The eyes open. They see, but they don't blink. The lungs rise, but there is no breath. Monitors flicker. Alarms wail. But the thing inside you already knows what to do. You were a vessel. Now you're a vector. The body jerks. Fingers twitch. The mouth smiles. The nurse screams. But you can't stop it. You're not driving anymore. You're just a passenger in your own husk, buried behind the eyes, watching as your skin becomes a mask worn by something that does not fear death, because it's already lived through millennia. And now, it's in the hospital hallway, walking, testing the limbs, learning the syntax of your species. Every blink a scan, every breath a lie. They'll ask later, how did he sit up? How did he walk? They won't know. They'll call it a miracle. They'll call it impossible. But none of them will say what's true, that the man who died on that table never came back. Something else did. And somewhere deep, deep inside, locked in the last cell of the mind, you're still screaming, still aware, still conscious, buried alive in the mind. And the last thing you hear before the lights go out completely? That voice, your voice, saying something you didn't choose. Don't worry, I remember everything. And then, nothing. No fade out. No tunnel of light. Just deployment. The infection has begun. And the worst part? You helped.